You're watching Station Zero.
About a year ago, I had my first paranormal experience. It wasn't exactly the first time I felt something, but it was the first time it was visual and I could hear things. First, I'd like to give some context to the story. I'm 22 years old, and my whole family has a somewhat connected history with the supernatural. I've heard various stories from both my grandmother and my mother, especially my mother, who told me stories about dreams and how she would talk to deceased relatives or receive messages. Despite the family history, I was never very spiritual. Okay, I had a few months where I felt things, but I concluded that it was just my fear taking over my mind and making me imagine things that don't exist. However, around June 2023, I had two experiences that changed my perspective of all of this. The first one, which may not mean anything and could just be in my head, but after the second one, it made me think that it might have been some kind of contact. I'm a university student and I study at night, often finishing quite late, around 9:30 to 10 o'clock. When I was coming back from class, going down the stairs as I usually do, listening to music, I heard a voice call my name twice. I took off my headphones immediately and thought that it might be a classmate trying to tell me something I forgot or wanting to talk to me. At that moment, I went up the stairs, and when I reached the floor where my class was, I didn't see anyone there. I thought it was just my imagination, so I continued on my way home. A few days later, I was heading home again after class, and I had just gotten off the subway and was on the station overpass when I saw a tall man in an overcoat pass by me. I remember observing the light that illuminated the overpass blinking repeatedly at that moment. He walked past me, and out of curiosity I looked back, and there was no one there. I tried talking to my cousin about these two events, and he told me that our family has this spiritual side, suggesting that maybe I've reached the age where these things are surfacing in me. He told me he had similar experiences when he was my age. I don't know how much of this is true and how much is just nonsense, especially the part about the family. My cousin's a bit out there and he uses a lot of weed and other drugs. He's not crazy, but he can get a bit carried away with what he says sometimes. What do you guys think? Was it some kind of real connection with the paranormal or just in my head? During either my junior or senior year of high school, my dad moved into a new house after a divorce from my ex-stepmom. I had two younger siblings between the two of them, a younger brother and a younger sister. Since I lived with my mom a majority of the time during high school and stayed on campus during my first college semester, I shared a room in this house with Anna, my younger sister, who was about 9 years younger than me. Alex, my younger brother, by 6 years, had his own room down the hall. This incident takes place in the upstairs hallway. For context, the hallway comes off from the kitchen. Going down it, you'll pass the kids' bathroom on the left, with Alex's bedroom door across from it on the right. Continuing down the hallway ends in a small square, with the entrances to Anna and I's room, and Dad's room sitting catty-corner to each other. One night, the summer before I started college, I was coming home late from a date with my, at the time, boyfriend. It was about 2 a.m, so everyone in the house was asleep. Coming in the house, I knew my dad was dead asleep because I could hear him snoring. I went upstairs and walked to my room. Alex and Dad's doors were shut, meaning they were both asleep. Anna was asleep in our room, and I threw my phone onto my bed and went to the bathroom to get ready for bed. I shut the bathroom door and started getting dressed for bed and brushing my teeth. As I was finishing up and brushing my hair, I heard a noise from outside the bathroom door in the hallway. This didn't really surprise me since Alex usually got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. I went to open the door to tell him I would only be just a second, but before I turned the handle, I stopped. The first noise I heard had been the creaking of wood flooring in the hallway, but now I heard a different noise. It was breathing. Now, that doesn't seem scary in itself, but it wasn't normal breathing. It was heavy, not labored or anything, just heavy. I don't know how to explain it, but there's a difference between the sound of kids breathing and adults breathing when you hear it in dead silence. But the breathing sounded like an adult. I could still hear my dad snoring, so I knew it wasn't him. It couldn't be Alex, that's why I stopped in the first place. That, and as the footsteps moved to the kitchen, they sounded heavy, like a grown man walking around. This is when I started panicking. My first thought was an intruder. There was a sliding back door in the kitchen that led to the backyard, and our fence was by no means unclimbable. I was worried that one of the kids must have left it unlocked when they went to the park behind the house, and no one noticed. I knew for sure I locked the front door when I had come in, but since I didn't use it, I hadn't checked the back door. Since it all made sense in my mind, I started panicking even more. I locked the door and held my breath, and I could hear breathing start to come down the hallway. The creaking of the floorboards signaled how close it was to the bathroom door. I held my breath, frozen in absolute fear. The breathing was heavy and crystal clear, like a man was standing directly on the other side of the door. I was shaking with fear. My dad always locks his door at night, so he couldn't help my siblings. I didn't have my phone on me. It was in my room on my bed. I didn't have any sort of weapon in the bathroom. I hadn't heard any more movement from outside the door, and the breathing was still there. I slowly and quietly knelt down so I could look under the door. I was looking for feet. I was so scared I could hear my heart beating in my ears. There was nothing. No feet. And suddenly, no breathing. The creaking was gone too. I got up, still trying to be quiet, and grabbed my hairbrush. I figured that was the best thing I'd had for a weapon, and I was just going to make a mad dash for my phone on the bed. I held the hairbrush and quietly unlocked the door, then held my breath and listened. Nothing. I whipped the door open and looked up and down the hallway. Nothing. I ran to my room and grabbed my phone and called the boyfriend I had been on a date with hours prior. I even asked him if he had come inside after he dropped me off. I was so sure there had been someone in the house. With him on the phone, I went through and checked the whole house. There was nothing. I checked the back door in the kitchen, and it had been locked. Alex and Anna were sleeping peacefully, and I could tell by Dad's snoring he hadn't woken up either. I went to bed that night with my door locked. The next morning, I told my dad everything that had happened. He could tell that I had genuinely been scared, so he checked everywhere too. Apparently, we had an alarm system too, and it hadn't gone off that night. It wasn't an intruder, or at least not a person, but it was so real and so terrifying that I didn't visit my dad for a while after that. It was a few months before I spent the night at that house again. So, I've worked for hotels in California for about 8 years now, and I've had my fair share of paranormal experiences. But this one stood out pretty well, as it happened in broad daylight. I'm one of the maintenance men of this hotel, and it's a decent-sized, mid-range style, pool in the middle, restaurant near the lobby, etc. One day, I was asked to change out a sensor on one of the automatic toilets in the women's restroom in the outside hallway by the pool. So I walked to it, tools in hand, and start the process, having to grab 1 or 2 extra tools during it. Now once it's installed, there's a 10-minute cycle of it adjusting its sensors before use, so I end up waiting outside, leaning on the rails. One of my co-workers, Elle, ends up walking into the men's restroom after saying hi to me and asking me what I'm up to. By the way, the men's door is literally 5 feet from the women's door, and that's the only way in and out of the restrooms. A moment later, another co-worker, Jay, walks by to use the men's restroom and then comes out a few minutes later. Now, my time has just gone off, and as I'm walking towards the women's, I stop and ask Jay if Elle was still in there, because I might need help taking the tools back. Then he tells me no one else was in there. I end up walking inside the men's room slowly and see absolutely no trace of anyone else. I walk back out confused. Then across this hallway, about 40 feet away, I see Elle walking towards me. I stop him and say, "Hey, when did you leave the bathroom?" He told me he didn't use the bathroom today, and that it was his first time talking to me today. too. Months ago, before moving to a new home, I began to wake up during the night and feel as if I was being watched. My wife miscarried our first child. He was my first son, and I was shattered when it happened. Well, one night, I woke up, not really sure what time it was. Wife was asleep and all the kids were sleeping. I check on them periodically through the night because, as a father, I like to know my kids are safe and sleeping peacefully. I know my son was in the living room. He gets nightmares and I'll run in there and assure him I'm there. However, the night I woke up, I faced the wall, but I felt this presence. I felt like I was being watched. I sat up instinctively and see the silhouette of what I thought was my son standing in the doorway. "Hey buddy, you okay? You have a nightmare?" No answer, but I saw the blonde hair and a smile in what dim light came from the television that was on in the living room. I began to get out of bed and what I thought was my son dove around the doorframe. I walked out my room and see my son sound asleep. "Buddy?" My heart starts racing now as I approached my son and checked to make sure he's sound asleep and not trying to fool me. Undoubtedly asleep, and I had no other sons then. I began to look around the house, but the image of my son in the doorway kept replaying in my head. What if it was my deceased son? Was he always watching? Nothing like this has happened since, but I can't shake the possibility that it was him. So, my first encounter was when I was very young. I believe I was around 5 or 6 when it occurred. My household growing up was a very dark environment. My dad was an abusive alcoholic who would do emotional and physical harm to my 2 siblings, myself and my mom. We never really had much aside from the abuse, but we stayed together and loved one another. I'm not sure if it was the energy of that place or something that had happened there before that caused what I saw. My sister had been kicked out by my dad at the time, and I was sleeping with her regularly. I was young and scared of the dark, and generally just didn't want to sleep alone. One night, I woke up suddenly facing the window of my room. It being a small single-wide trailer, the rooms weren't big at all. My dad, being the way he was, had taken the door off because he didn't trust me for one reason or another. I just remember waking up, rolling over, and seeing this girl in a white dress in the open doorway. Her hair was black and she had no shoes on. Her hair covered her face and I couldn't see any of her features. I felt a foreboding feeling coming from her and I just knew I shouldn't blink my eyes. I was afraid she would rush up and be in my face when I opened them, so I stared as long as I could. And as I did, I just felt this pulling sensation as if she wanted me to come to her. I knew that this wasn't a good idea, and to be honest, I was so scared that I basically was a statue. I stared as long as I could, and eventually I had to blink. When I did, she was gone. I'm not sure what would have happened if I went to her, but I'm glad I didn't. Keep in mind that during this time, I was too scared to watch horror movies or anything like that, so images like that wasn't normal for me. I'd never seen it before, and definitely not after. My second and last encounter came about 1 to 2 years after that. I had just come home from a Valentine's dance and I was getting ready for bed. I tended to sleep near my parents' room and, if I could, on the couch because I felt safer. I had had a great night with no negativity at all, which is what I can't explain about this situation even more. So, while I was trying to sleep, I started to hear a smacking noise. Kind of like what people who chew with their mouth open sound like. And I was very confused, so I looked down the side of the couch at the floor and saw what looked like a head. I stared at it for a bit because it was making the noise. Eventually, it slowly started looking up at me, and I could see that it had the features of an old man. It was smacking its mouth, and it looked like a lot of blood was coming out. I got so scared that I jumped up and stamped on the head. I don't remember feeling anything solid other than the floor when I did, so I just ran into my parents' room. I crawled into bed beside my mom and tried to sleep. I wanted to check my surroundings because I still felt unsafe. I saw the head everywhere now, like it had duplicated itself. It was all over the sheets and on the floors beside the bed. All of them were staring at me and smacking their lips. And all I could do was put my head under the covers and pray. I eventually fell asleep. I'm not sure if it was the toxic environment I grew up in or what caused these things to happen. I've never forgotten these experiences, and I just felt like I needed to get it off my chest and see what other believers might think.
If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And turn on the bell to be up to date on our latest uploads. And remember, don't change the channel.